So today we're going to talk about working with a wide-angle lens. Alright guys, so welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Golby. Apologies for not having a video up for you guys last week. Things have been pretty hectic around here. I've had a few last minute shoots come in that have sort of demanded my attention and I haven't been able to get to this channel. However, it has given me a chance to be moving around the city quite a bit and to play with one of my new favorite lenses, which is the Laowa 9mm f2.8 for Fuji. So an ultra-wide angle may not seem like the ideal lens for moving about a city, especially one as packed as Seoul. I mean, a wide-angle lens is a fairly inclusive kind of lens, so it allows you to get a lot in the frame, and Seoul is a fairly densely packed place, so you're often getting a lot of things, extraneous things you may not want in the frame when you're shooting. So it's been a good exercise to be able to try and simplify the things that I see, get in really close, and really work with a wide-angle lens in the streets of Seoul. So I thought I'd talk to you guys a little bit today about how it is that you can go about exploiting the characteristics of a wide-angle lens. Okay, so the shot I have on screen right here, I believe exemplifies exactly all the characteristics of a wide-angle lens. So the things that are closer to the lens are quite large, the things that are further away from the lens get quite small, the lines tend to converge quite a bit, and you get a lot of keystoning if you tilt the camera up or down. You also are able to include a lot of background elements. So if I were to be using a tighter lens, I may only be able to include part of the building, but with a wide-angle lens, I'm able to really include that and a lot of the sky. And regardless of whether you're close to your subject or far away from it, that background is still very much there. And so I believe that this is a fairly good representation of what a wide-angle lens is typically used to do. Right, so let's start with that final point, the including a lot of the background. So if you take a look at this next shot, what you'll see is a fisherman on the Han River here in Seoul, and he's just caught himself a fish, and I was working with him for quite some time. He was pretty used to me, and at that point I could use my 9mm and get in very close. As you see, I mean, he's quite large in the frame, so you're able to see that he's very, very close to me. But what you are able to do, as well as having a large subject, is have a huge amount of background in there. So we had some really beautiful clouds on this day, and I wanted to include as much of that as possible, but also include the fisherman and his activities. And one of the other great things about a wide-angle lens is that when you get close to things, things get really, really big. And when you get further away from things, they get really, really small. So this perspective distortion is something that you can really play with, and in this case, I've been able to make the city significantly smaller than my fisherman, placing a lot of emphasis on him. Okay, so one of the other things that wide-angle lenses do very well, or if you're not careful, quite poorly, is they keystone a lot. And what that means is that if you tilt the camera vertically, what you'll notice is that, say, a set of straight lines will actually start to converge as you tilt the camera up, or converge like this as you tilt the camera down. And that can be either a compositional tool, or it can look a little sloppy at times. So you have to be very careful, and if you want to keep lines straight, just make sure that your camera is level, especially if you happen to be using something like the XH1 or the GFX, where you have the full three-dimensional internal level. Then this is a really easy way to make sure that you'll keep your lines straight. If not, just make sure that you check around the edges. But, you know, like with this frame, if you want to include a bit of keystoning, then it can be a really effective tool for composition. Okay, so kind of a combination of both of those things is the ability to really emphasize lines. So, as I mentioned, the closer you get to things, the more they become exaggerated. So, for example, if I put the camera close to the ground, whatever's on the ground will become exaggerated in size. If I lift it up, those things will gradually become more normal in size. And you'll see this quite a bit. People will, shoot railroad tracks converging into the distance, or roads converging into the distance. And if you get down very, very close to that, you can actually really emphasize that perspective. And the other part of that, of course, is also keystoning. So if you were to get down low and then tilt, you'll also get things that are very, very close to the camera now, and they will converge into the distance. So you get that sort of keystoning effect with the addition of having things that are very, very large in the foreground. And that gives you the ability to really put emphasis on something. So get in very, very close with a wide-angle lens. Okay, so a couple of things that I've discovered specifically about the Laowa 9mm recently, that it has some pretty obnoxious circular aberrations at times. So if you're pointing it at things like streetlights at night, or fluorescent bulbs inside where there's a lot of high contrast, you will often get these sort of spherical aberrations around those lights if you're not careful. So always be checking on that, because it's not the most pleasant thing. That's not to say that you can't get some pretty amazing sort of star effects from this lens, but I would always try to be careful that you're not going to get that spherical aberration. The other thing that I have noticed with this lens recently is that it has these beautiful red rings in its flare. So if you put a point source, a very bright point source, something like the sun, in the center of the frame, and I'll show you an example of it right now. I've been looking for the right subject to try and make this really work, so this is just a sample, but if you actually point this directly at the sun, you can get these beautiful concentric red circles. So that's another thing to be aware of with this lens. Okay guys, so I know it's been a short one, but I hope it's been helpful. These are a few things that I look out for when I'm trying to use a wide-angle lens, and also a couple of things I've noticed while using the Laowa 9mm. So again, tune in next week. We have a show every Wednesday, except for last week, and so I'll try to keep those going for you guys. So if you've enjoyed this content, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check in next week. Thanks a lot.